Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. We are coming to you from our usual spot here in Jerusalem, and I have to say, the energy in the city has been heavy lately. If you listened to episode 898, you know we have been recording through some pretty intense nights with the Iron Dome intercepts lighting up the sky. It makes the topics we discuss feel a lot less like abstract theory, and a lot more like the world right outside our window, especially after the massive joint strikes this past weekend, what the US is calling Operation Epic Fury.
Herman Pobbleberry here, and you are not kidding, Corn. It is one thing to read a white paper on ballistic trajectories in a library, and it is quite another to hear the rumble of those interceptions while you are trying to make coffee. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt this morning that feels incredibly timely given the strikes on Saturday and Sunday. He wanted us to move past the headlines and actually map out the Iranian nuclear and missile infrastructure that is being targeted.
Right, because we keep hearing these names. Isfahan, Natanz, Fordow, Barchin. They get dropped in news reports as targets, but I think for a lot of people, they are just dots on a map or scary-sounding names. Daniel was asking if we could actually explain what each of these facilities does, how they fit together, and why a strike on one is fundamentally different from a strike on another.
It is a brilliant prompt because this is not just a list of buildings. It is a massive, interconnected industrial machine. If you want to understand the strategic stakes of what the United States and Israel are doing right now, you have to understand the chemistry of uranium and the physics of long-range delivery. You cannot have the warhead without the enrichment, and you cannot have the threat without the missile.
So today we are going to build that mental map. We are going to look at the upstream facilities where the raw materials are processed, the deep underground enrichment sites where the actual fuel is made, and the research centers where the weaponization happens. Herman, I know you have been digging into the IAEA reports and the latest satellite imagery analysis, so where do we start? Do we start at the beginning of the fuel cycle?
I think we have to start with Isfahan. If you think of the Iranian nuclear program as a giant hourglass, Isfahan is the top half. It is the bottleneck for almost everything else. When people hear Isfahan, they might think of the beautiful historic bridges, but for military planners, Isfahan is the heart of the uranium conversion facility, or the UCF.
Okay, so explain the UCF. What is actually happening inside those buildings?
This is where the magic or the nightmare begins. Iran mines its own uranium or imports it as yellowcake. But you cannot just put yellowcake into a centrifuge. It is a solid, chunky material. To enrich uranium, you need it to be a gas. So, at Isfahan, they take that yellowcake and they chemically convert it into uranium hexafluoride, which everyone in the industry calls UF6.
And UF6 is the gas that eventually goes into the centrifuges at places like Natanz.
Exactly. Without the UF6 from Isfahan, the centrifuges at Natanz and Fordow are just very expensive, very fast-spinning lawn ornaments. But Isfahan is actually more complex than just a gas station. It also houses a fuel fabrication plant and research reactors. And, crucially for the current context, the Isfahan region is a massive hub for the Iranian ballistic missile program. They have facilities there that produce solid fuel rocket motors and assembly lines for the Shahab and Khaibar missiles.
So when we see reports of strikes in Isfahan, like the ones we saw in June of 2025, and again this weekend, it is a dual-purpose target. You are hitting the chemical precursor for the nuclear program and the manufacturing base for the delivery systems at the same time.
Precisely. It is a target-rich environment. But here is the catch. Unlike some of the other sites, the UCF at Isfahan is mostly above ground. It is hardened with reinforced concrete, but it is vulnerable to conventional precision-guided munitions. If you take out the conversion capability there, you effectively starve the rest of the nuclear cycle, even if you do not touch the underground bunkers elsewhere.
Okay, so we have the gas from Isfahan. Now we move to the place everyone has heard of, Natanz. This has been the centerpiece of the Iranian nuclear story for 20 years. What does it look like today?
Natanz is massive. It is the primary uranium enrichment facility. It is divided into two main sections, the fuel enrichment plant, which is a huge underground hall, and the pilot fuel enrichment plant. But the big news in 2026 is the new site nearby called Kua-i-Kolang, Gazla, or Pickaxe Mountain.
Pickaxe Mountain. That sounds like a villain's lair.
It practically is. It is a new tunnel complex just south of the main Natanz site, buried under the Zagros Mountains. Analysts estimate it could be between 80 and 100 meters deep, that is over 300 feet of solid rock. It is designed to be even deeper than Fordow, specifically to protect advanced IR-6 centrifuge cascades from the kind of strikes we are seeing right now.
And the older halls at Natanz? I remember you saying they house roughly 15,000 IR-1 centrifuges.
They do, though Iran has been aggressively replacing them with the newer IR-6 models, which are 10 times more efficient. Natanz is a factory. It can generate between 250 and 300 kilograms of 5% low-enriched uranium every single month. But the concern is how quickly they can jump from 5% to the 90% needed for a weapon.
That leads us to Fordow. If Natanz is the high-volume factory, Fordow is the fortress, right?
Exactly. Fordow is buried 80 meters deep near the city of Qom. Because it is so well protected, Iran uses it for the most dangerous work. As of this month, the IAEA estimates Iran has a stockpile of over 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. Most of that was produced at Fordow.
60%. That is just a small step away from weapons grade.
It is a technical hair's breadth. 60% has no credible civilian use. It is a demonstration of technical proximity. This is why the U.S. used the massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bomb against Fordow in the June 2025 strikes. They were trying to physically collapse the mountain because conventional bombs just bounce off.
Now, let us shift to Parchin. This site has been in the news recently regarding some very specific types of strikes on a building called Talagan 2.
Parchin is a leading munitions center southeast of Tehran, but Talagan 2 is the dark heart of the site. It was part of the old Ahmad plan for nuclear weaponization. Satellite imagery from late 2025 showed Iran was rebuilding and potentially reactivating that specific building to conduct hydrodynamic tests, basically testing the high explosive triggers that make a nuclear bomb go off.
So while Natanz and Fordow make the fuel, Parchin is where they work on the spark plug.
Precisely, and in the strikes this past weekend, Talagan 2 was reportedly a primary target again. If you want to stop a nuclear program, you have to hit the fuel, but you also have to hit the brains of the bomb, the equipment that knows how to turn that fuel into a functioning device.
We also have to mention the missile sites, like the Sharaud Space Center. We saw major damage there back in October of 2024.
Sharaud is critical because it is where the IRGC builds solid fuel ballistic missiles. Solid fuel is a game changer because you can store the missiles fully fueled and launch them on a moment's notice. You do not have to spend hours fueling them on the launch pad where a satellite can see you. Striking Sharaud and the mixing facilities at Parchin is how you physically limit Iran's ability to replenish the missiles they have been firing at us here in Israel.
And then there is Arak, or the Kondab reactor. That is the plutonium path, right?
Correct. It is a heavy water reactor. If it is fully operational, the spent fuel can be reprocessed to extract plutonium. It is a slower route than uranium enrichment, but it gives you a second path to a weapon. As part of the 2015 deal, the core was supposed to be filled with concrete, but there has been constant concern that Iran could revert the design.
So, looking at this whole map, Herman, how do these sites actually fit together in a real-world strike scenario? If you are a military planner, you are looking at this massive distributed network. You cannot just hit one building and call it a day.
No, it is a campaign. The goal of Operation Roaring Lion and Epic Fury is to reset the clock. You look for the long lead items. If you destroy the UCF at Isfahan, the whole system eventually runs out of gas. If you hit the mixing halls at Parchin, they cannot build the rocket motors. You are creating a series of bottlenecks to buy time for diplomacy or internal change.
But isn't there a risk that striking these sites actually pushes them to go faster? Like, if they feel their program is being dismantled, they might decide they have to reach the finish line as fast as possible with whatever they have left.
That is the ultimate gamble, Corn. Some analysts argue striking is the only way to prevent a nuclear Iran. Others argue it is the very thing that convinces the leadership they must have a deterrent to survive. It is a classic security dilemma.
And what about the environmental aspect? Daniel mentioned the fear of fallout. If you hit Natanz or Fordow while they are full of uranium gas, are we looking at a second Chernobyl?
That is a common misconception. Uranium hexafluoride is chemically toxic, but it is not highly radioactive like spent fuel from a power reactor. If you blow up a centrifuge hall, you have a local chemical disaster, but you are not going to send a radioactive cloud across the Middle East. The danger is the strategic fallout, not the literal radiation.
That is an important distinction. Now, I want to go back to the air defenses. These sites are the most heavily defended pieces of real estate in Iran, right?
Absolutely. They use S-300, S-400 systems, plus their own Bavar 373. When we see these strikes, it involves a massive electronic warfare component to jam radars, so stealth aircraft like the F-35 can get close enough to drop those bunker busters. It is an incredibly complex dance.
It makes me think back to episode 897, where we talked about the neurobiology of high-stress zones. The people living near these sites in Isfahan or Tehran are living under a constant threat. The psychological toll is immense.
It is a terrifying reality. These facilities are often embedded near civilian infrastructure. The missile plants in Isfahan are on the outskirts of a major metropolitan area. When things go wrong, the margin for error is zero.
So, for our listeners trying to make sense of the news today, March 2nd, 2026, what should they look for? If a headline says a strike hit Parchin, what should they think?
If it is Parchin, think weaponization and rocket motors. If it is Isfahan, think fuel supply and the manufacturing base. If it is Natanz or Fordow or the new Pickaxe Mountain site, that is the big one. That is a direct attempt to stop the enrichment of uranium itself.
And keep an eye on the depth. If they are hitting Pickaxe Mountain, it means they are using the heaviest munitions in the world.
Absolutely. The level of force tells you the intent. Are they sending a message, or are they trying to physically collapse the program?
This has been a really helpful breakdown, Herman. It is easy to get lost in the jargon, but when you see it as a sequence, from yellow cake to gas, from gas to enrichment, and from enrichment to a warhead, the picture becomes much clearer.
It is a machine. A very dangerous, very complex machine, and right now we are seeing a very deliberate attempt to throw a wrench into every single one of its gears.
I think that is a good place to wrap up. We have covered the map, the chemistry, and the strategic logic. Thank you to Daniel for sending this in. It is one of those topics where the more you know, the more you realize how much there is to lose.
Definitely. And hey, if you find these deep dives helpful, please leave a review on Spotify or your favorite app. It helps the show reach more people looking for this context.
Yeah, we really appreciate the support. You can always find us at myweirdprompts.com. We had the full archive there, including those past episodes on missile physics and nuclear precision.
We will be keeping a close eye on things here in Jerusalem. Stay curious, stay safe, and we will talk to you in the next one.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will see you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.